Congratulations, you're watching your first living environment video. I didn't plan to do this yet, but somebody decided to open a bogus email or 7, and here we are. As you watch this, fill in the notes as usual. Then make sure you answer the questions in the forums quiz posted below this video in your OneNote notebook. We looked at a few different body systems right now, like the digestive, circulatory, respiratory, and immune systems. They don't work independently of each other, though. You don't have tubes filled with blood on one side of your body and a pathway for food on the other side of your body. They don't take turns working either. All the systems work together to maintain homeostasis and keep you alive, and somebody has to run the show. The body systems we've learned about, and multiple others that we haven't, all need to be in constant communication, like parts of a well-run company. How exactly are they connected? We're going to find out, and to do that, we're headed right back where we started. What happens when our body temperature gets too high? We've done this about 1,000,000 times this year, all the way back to that weird woman running in the treadmill in the middle of the woods. Something's going to tell a part of our body that controls sweating to start. This will let the liquid sweat absorb heat from our bodies, cooling us down. At this point, do we keep sweating forever? Of course not. Our brain recognizes that our temperature is back to normal and turns off the sweat until we get hot again in the future. In this example, our body is shivering. Why would it do that? Well, because it's cold, obviously. If you're cold, your brain tells your body to shiver, which creates body heat to warm us up, like a little mini exercising. The temperature goes up, and eventually the brain tells our muscles that we can stop shivering, at least until maybe we get cold again in the future. But something turns on, something turns off again. It goes around this cycle. When you eat a meal, the sugar is quickly absorbed into your blood. This is the signal for your pancreas to release insulin, a chemical that will cause the sugar to be pulled out of the blood and stored for later. Once the blood sugar reaches a normal and desirable level, insulin will be turned off before the blood sugar gets too low again. Eventually you eat and the process repeats. We'll see a little bit more detail about how this works soon. Anyone remember what this thing's called? Think back to when we learned about plants much earlier in the year. Or alternatively, you could just look at the word right here on the screen, or the word right there on the screen. It's not really hidden from you. But this is a stomata, or stomate. If you remember, this is how a plant takes in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So plants need carbon dioxide as one of the ingredients for photosynthesis. They can get the water up through their roots, they can take in sunlight through their leaves, but they need to take in carbon dioxide through these little openings, little mouths underneath their leaves. So when a plant needs carbon dioxide, they're going to open the stomata. They will open their stomates to allow carbon dioxide to get into the leaves. That's great, but eventually with the door open, they may start losing water. You may lose other materials you don't want to let out. They will use them to let out oxygen also, but you don't want to lose the stuff you want to hold on to. So at this point, what's the plant going to do? They're not going to panic and say, okay, we'll stop doing everything entirely, but they can just simply close the door. They'll use these guard cells on the outside here. Remember, those are the ones that open and close the stomates, stomates just being really the middle part. They use the guard cells to close up the stomate, and that's going to stop everything from getting out. So once again, we see the cycle of something happening, we turn something on, something else happening, and we turn something off. Always regulating what goes on. So now that we've re-seen a couple of examples we've seen multiple times during the year, we're going to go back and just get a couple of quick reminders before we move on. First is homeostasis. Like I said, we started there at the beginning of the year. We're going to come back to it now. Because this chapter is really about how we tie together all these different body systems to make sure homeostasis is being maintained. As you see on your screen, homeostasis is just that. It's maintaining this stable environment inside our bodies despite anything else that happens outside. So how can we keep our body situation mostly normal? Could be from some kind of external change that's going on, could be from something going wrong in our bodies that we try to correct, but how are we going to keep ourselves mostly balanced there? And feedback mechanisms are going to be how we do that. There are going to be these pretty effective ways that we can try to keep everything mostly normal, mostly balanced, just like all the ways we've seen so far today. Now, you could have two different types of feedback. One is positive feedback, and that's where things just keep getting turned on one after another. So it's like you went around a room and just turn one light switch on after another. One thing you turn on, turn something else on, turn something else on, turn something else on. So I had this picture of the bull here because I think of it like the running of the bulls. If you ever see the footage of that, bull gets loose in the road and people start to run. They run into other people and they start to run and other people start to run. If you're ever out in public and you see suddenly this wave of people running towards you, you're probably not going to stand there and wonder, well, I wonder why they're all coming towards me. You're going to start to run the way they're running to and figure it out later. So that would be positive feedback. Something happens and then something else happens because of that and something else happens because of that. And it just keeps building off itself and feeding off itself. That's positive feedback. The other alternative is called negative feedback, and that's what we've seen with these couple of examples. So these different feedback mechanisms we looked at today, with how sugar is maintained, how our temperature is controlled, how the plants use the stomata to take in carbon dioxide and stop carbon dioxide or water from being lost. These are all examples of negative feedback. Some signal is turned on in response to something that happened, and then something eventually sort of equals out, and you turn another thing on or turn off what was originally turned on. You can constantly keep flipping these switches. You open up the stomach to let in carbon dioxide, you close the stomach to stop water from being changed. You turn on sweating if you get too hot, you turn off sweating if you get too cold. You turn on shivering if you get too cold, you turn off shivering if you get too hot. Constantly just checking and reevaluating and reversing changes that were made already, one way or another, until you just kind of keep it balanced in the middle and keep that homeostasis. Remember, we're dynamic systems. We're living things. We're not in perfect balance all the time. We can try to keep mostly around a balance point. A little bit high, a little bit low, but mostly right about even. In this chapter, part of what we'll see is how we actually send signals to our bodies. There are a couple different systems, a couple different types of messages that we can send, but they're mostly going to use the blood to move around. Most of the things in our body will use the blood to go around, and that's going to be the delivery system for these messages, these molecules. We'll have a little different system also, but blood's going to be very important. So these signaling molecules will use the circulatory system to travel around our body, but why is it so important? Why is that going to be such an important thing? Single-celled organisms don't have blood because they're so small. So if you are a single-celled organism, you are exposed to the outside environment. You don't need blood to move things around. You're only this tiny little cell. If you absorb something from your surroundings, it's automatically right where it needs to go. It doesn't have anywhere else it needs to be. We are larger organisms, though. So we need to move things around a much larger area, a much larger surface. We need a roadway or some kind of pathway of these systems of tubes and tunnels to get things from one part of our body to the next. So this could be like oxygen that we come and bring through the lungs. It has to be delivered to cells. Food nutrients that we take out and absorb through our villi and small intestine, those have to be delivered to our cells. Anything like that. Any other materials, they need to be brought from one part of our body to the other. Otherwise, every one of our body cells would have to be exposed to the environment, or would have to be in one tight place to always be able to take oxygen or get nutrients from food. They'd always have to be right there and be able to do every job themselves. Thankfully, we don't have to do that because we have this nice blood system that will deliver the things we need. We can get the oxygen in one part of our body, get food in another part of our body, different body systems doing different jobs, and then the blood will carry everything, whatever it is, where it needs to be. So again, single cells are in contact with their environments, don't need blood. They're tiny. They don't have any use for it. We are much bigger, much more complicated, much more intricate, so we need the blood systems to carry everything around our bodies. That includes cells to carry oxygen, cells to defend us, all these different jobs, but we need the blood to do those jobs and carry out that purpose. Go through the following examples of how the blood helps transport needed materials to different parts of the body. For each one, think about where the molecules come from, where they need to be delivered, and what they're used for. Each of these examples combines different body systems. You'll see how digestive and immune and circulatory, all these different systems are working together. But in these examples, it's how the blood is kind of the conduit for all these different systems to communicate. We'll do the first one together, and then you work on the rest. Pause the video as needed to give yourself time to think, then play it again to fill in the answers on your notes. First one is antibodies. Think about what you know about antibodies, which is hopefully a lot since you did just take a test on the topic. Where do we get antibodies from? Where do we want the antibodies to go? Why are they needed? How do they help us maintain homeostasis? So think, what are antibodies? What do they do for us? Where are we getting these things from? Well, we know because we drew this thing last week, drew the whole little process around our papers, we know that they come from white blood cells. Specifically the B cells, but in general, it's just white blood cells. White blood cells will make the antibodies for us. Now, why do we need them in the first place? What do we need them to do for us? We need them to defend us. We need them to tag bad guys that we can now mark and say, you do not belong in our bodies. Let's have somebody come and fight this thing. So we need them to go to a pathogen and mark it for destruction by one of the bigger, meaner white blood cells a little bit later on. And what's the whole point of this? Why do we want to do this? Why would they tag the pathogen? What happens if they don't tag the pathogen? Is it really such a bad thing? We need them because they will help keep us safe. They're going to try to protect us from disease, from outside invaders, from any bad thing that we don't want in our bodies. These antibodies will be there to mark it and have somebody else come get rid of it. So we see now, antibodies help keep us safe. It's going to be kind of a bridge between the immune system and other body systems. It's going to keep us safe and be moved around by our blood. Do the same thing now for glucose, for oxygen, for all these different molecules you'll see on the next slide, like carbon dioxide, hormones, and amino acids. Some of these things we've seen already, some of them we really haven't talked about much, but just why are they needed? Where are they coming from? How do they tie into all these body systems we've seen already earlier in the year? How do they carry around by the blood? And then going forward in this chapter, we'll see how they all kind of come together and get used for communication and maintaining homeostasis overall, wrap everything up and tie it together. So you can pause it here. I'm going to just kind of let it go for a little while. Again, you can pause it when you need to, play it when you need to, and fill in the rest of your slides. That's it. Quick, short lesson just to intro the new chapter. Hopefully by the time at least some of you are watching this, our computer system will be back up and we don't have to do this every day. Now that you've seen this all, just go back to your OneNote. You have a forms questionnaire underneath. Fill it out there. Make sure you save any work you're doing. I'll be able to see the results. We can discuss this and move right on with the next stuff in our chapter.